If the New Orleans Saints want to get a big-time upset victory at home against the Detroit Lions, it's all going to start with the defense. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you very much to all you everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget you can subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss the latest episodes. And if you want to keep the conversation going, take part in our exclusive film studies, Q&As, and much more, you can become a Locked On Saints insider today by simply texting the words Who Dat to 504-285-7473 to join a community I would love for you to be a part of. As always, I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on your favorite social media, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, Saints News Network, Tuesdays on the Locked On NFL podcast, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we are brought to you by our friends at GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Breaking down today the game plan for the New Orleans Saints. How can the New Orleans Saints come up with an upset victory against the Detroit Lions? I know that it might feel like a long shot, but we're here to break down a game. So let's talk about what the New Orleans Saints can do to get a win. We'll also discuss what a win or a loss means for this team, because they can mean very different things, and there's even varying degrees within how those wins and losses could look and what that could mean for New Orleans moving forward. We'll look at the offensive side as we look at our Jackson 5, the 5 things the New Orleans Saints need to do if they want to be in position to win this game. The first thing on the offensive side is going to be all about Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill for a second week in a row. But to get us started here, we're going to start off with the defense, because Dennis Allen said earlier on this week that the New Orleans Saints have the identity of an explosive offense with an opportunistic defense. While I don't agree that they are an explosive offense, and especially going into this game where they're going to be without Rashid Shaheed, who's their most explosive player on offense, and maybe Lynn Bowden steps into that really, really well. He has the capability to do that for sure. The thing that I look at over on the defensive side that they do have is that they do indeed have an opportunistic defense. So while the New Orleans Saints may not have access to that explosive offensive identity that they claim to have, the defense and its opportunistic nature is still absolutely there. So as we take a look at this, I think that it's the defense that's going to determine this game, or what this game looks like for the New Orleans Saints. And hear me when I say that when I talk about how the defense can impact what this game looks like, that means that it can impact from a win or a loss standpoint. It also can impact from a close loss to a blowout loss standpoint, can impact from a close win to a blowout win standpoint. Like, I'm not just talking about win-loss here. I'm talking about what this game looks like, and its entire complexion will be decided by how the New Orleans Saints defense looks. So as we get started with that, let's take a look at our Jackson 5, starting with the first 3 things that have to happen, which all start on the defensive side of the football. So to get us started here, we have to see the New Orleans Saints taking advantage of the Lions' turnover problem. The Detroit Lions right now, I believe they're -5, -6 when it comes to turnover differential. Over the course of the past few weeks in particular, they've been a very turnover-heavy team. That's something that if you're the New Orleans Saints defense, you have to look for and prey upon. Number 2 here, you're looking to be prepared for a diverse rushing attack. We're going to break this down a little bit more in depth here in just a second. But the Detroit Lions don't have one identity when it comes to their running game. They run a lot of different concepts that are usually not run by a single team, right? I'll explain that here in a little bit. And then the number 3 thing here is generate pressure on a non-mobile Jared Goff. There's no excuses here for the New Orleans Saints pass rush when it comes to getting pressure on a quarterback. Jared Goff is not a mobile quarterback. Jared Goff is the type of quarterback that the Saints pass rush was built to pester. Is built to pester guys like Matt Ryan and Tom Brady. Jared Goff is a lesser version than both of those quarterbacks, but is just as non-mobile as both of those quarterbacks. So they should be able to get home. So let's start off with point number 1 here in terms of taking advantage of the taking advantage of the turnover problem for Detroit. This was a big one that Matt Derry and I discussed on yesterday's Crossover Thursday, that this is effectively the biggest key to the game. If the New Orleans Saints can generate those takeaways and get their offense back on the field, and then the offense is able to make good on those opportunities, which is where the defense might be opportunistic, but the offense hasn't been, that usually translates to a win for the New Orleans Saints. In the Saints' 5 wins, they have scored off of turnovers. In the Saints' 6 losses, they have either failed to score off of turnovers, or in the case of the Minnesota Vikings game, did not force a takeaway. So that's what I look at as being a key to this game. When it comes to preparing for the diverse rushing attack of the Detroit Lions, this is Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator. He's not one of these guys that's like of the McVay tree, of the Shanahan tree, or of the whatever tree. He is very much a blend of all the different things. I think he described his offense as being a mutt because he's had experience coaching with a bunch of different guys. And so he uses a lot of the McVay stuff that you see over in Los Angeles, but does things a little bit differently. So for instance, while Los Angeles would, let's say, like lead the NFL in outside zone runs, Detroit would lead the NFL in outside zone runs using a fullback as a lead blocker or using a pulling tackle as a lead blocker. Like, they mesh some of these man concepts by using these power concepts, lead blocking, pulling tackles, pulling guards, but then use the wide zone approach of the outside zone run to get it all and kind of marry it all together. They do some really interesting things. But they were also top 5 in the NFL when it comes to power runs, when it comes to counter runs, when it comes to trap runs, when it comes to outside runs. Like, they're one of those offenses that just kind of does a little bit of everything in their run game. Why? Because they like operating out of really tight formations. So instead of being super spread out, they like to operate a little bit more tightly, because what that gives them is the opportunity to give the same look on a passing play as they give to one of those pulling guards, pulling tackles on a run play. That creates some confusion for the defense and even allows for them to keep an extra blocker because of how compact they play their offense in terms of those tight formations. Allows them to keep an extra blocker back and have some success with that. So that's one of the ways that they ward off pressure, is by establishing the run game and then utilizing run looks or passing plays out of their same run looks. So they do a lot of really good disguising over the offensive side. So you have to be ready for that if you're the New Orleans Saints defense. And then finally, when it comes to generating pressure on Jared Goff, it's to be ready for exactly that, and especially to understand how much their offense is option driven in late downs. They use a lot of option plays, and sometimes Jared Goff goes to the line of scrimmage with plays to be able to change into and things like that. Those are all things you have to be ready for. But when you get Jared Goff in a passing situation and they're ready to attack that and ready to attack you as a passing defense, this is your opportunity to find a way. And I'm putting a lot on Carl Granderson in this game in terms of generating pressure. Coming off of that blind side of Jared Goff, it's on him in this game to set the tone as the pressure player. And if the Saints can figure it out, they should also find ways to supplement pressure with some blitzes, create pressure and all that, especially on third downs as well. The Saints can do all of those things on defense. They put their offense in position to have the impact that it needs to have. But the offense has a lot of work to do in order for the New Orleans Saints to win this game. And the first of which is to almost effectively turn the offense over to Alvin Kamara. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends at FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook and the official sports betting partner here on the Locked On Podcast Network. The line has not moved for the New Orleans Saints. Still 4.5-point underdogs at home up against the Detroit Lions. So maybe you like the New Orleans Saints to keep this one a little bit closer. Think maybe the defense is going to do its job. Maybe the Saints don't win, but they come in at maybe like a 3-point loss or something like that. Or maybe you think of them as winners as a whole, or you want to just go with the money line on the Detroit Lions. Lots of great ways for you to get involved and have some fun with this game. And one of the best ways to do it, especially if you're a new customer, is to just take the money line on one of your favorites so far this week. Maybe you like the Miami Dolphins this week, something like that. You take one of those favorites, you win a $5 bet, and new customers are going to get $150 back in bonus bets. That's $150 in bonus bets. If your team wins, even if they're a heavy favorite, you can then use those bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. So go check them out today, FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Big thank you to all you everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Hope somebody had some time to go and smudge the Superdome, go and burn some sage, get everything ready, because the New Orleans Saints are looking to ward off some bad spirits and some negativity over on the offensive side of the football as they get ready to go up against the Detroit Lions. But the best way to ward off that bad juju, that negativity, is to turn this offense over to running back Alvin Kamara sooner rather than later. We're taking a look now as we continue our game plan episode here on Locked On Saints, breaking down how the New Orleans Saints could potentially come up with an upset win. I'm not putting any money on it at all, but if it was going to happen, here are the things that they need to do. We discussed the defensive side. Now let's take a look at the offensive side as you go back to Jackson 5 here. You want to see this New Orleans Saints offense win this game? They're going to have to do it through Alvin Kamara. Mixing in Alvin Kamara in any and every way that they can is imperative for this New Orleans Saints team. They also should turn back to Taysom when it comes to the red zone. These, to me, are the two single most important things that the New Orleans Saints must do outside of the usual standard things. Don't turn the ball over, protect the quarterback, score points. We know that those things have to happen for you to win a football game in any case. But right now, when you're about to go up against a Detroit Lions team that has, or is expected to not have, Alex Anzalone, who has been one of their top defensive players so far this season, and a passing defense that has given up as much yardage as it has given up over the course of the past few games, 760 or so, this is an opportunity for the New Orleans Saints to really be able to establish something. The issue with establishing something in the passing game is that you don't have Michael Thomas. You don't have Rashid Shaheed, who is inarguably your most explosive player on the offensive side of the football. And you might not have a 100% Chris Olave if you have him at all as he continues through concussion protocol. Limited Wednesday, limited Thursday. That's a good sign. We'll see what happens today. So that means to me, you're looking for your other explosive players. And your other explosive players are Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill. And Alvin Kamara should not be a guy that's relegated to just running between the tackles. Get outside, get him in space, line him up in the slot, run some routes with him out of the backfield. Where's the wheel route? Where are the screens to Alvin Kamara? Where's the slot usage? Where's lining him up out wide? Get that back in your offense. I don't understand this. Like, this is the second year in a row that we've gotten to December and said, wow, the New Orleans Saints really aren't using Alvin Kamara in a way that makes a lot of sense. And and this year it's even more kind of befuddling because they went out there and they got Jamal Williams, who can be a between the tackles monster for you, but then they've continuously not utilized him at all. Now they utilize him as a pass protector. He's an outstanding pass protector. And I don't want to diminish that he hasn't had his contributions to the offense. He absolutely has. There's a couple of plays, a couple of touchdowns. In fact, the Chris Olave touchdown, which I think was the last touchdown that Derek Carr has thrown, if I remember correctly, it was against the Chicago Bears. That touchdown, or at least his last touchdown was thrown in that game. That touchdown was because Jamal Williams made a big-time block out of the backfield. Jamal Williams has had an impact, but he can have a much larger impact if the offense was actually utilizing him. And so I think that what they need to do is finally strike this balance between how they really want to use Jamal Williams and Alvin Kamara, because it doesn't really feel like there was a plan there. And if there has been a plan, it feels like there's been a lot of things every week that have gotten in the way of it, and they've kind of had to just adjust and play by ear, because there's not really been anything consistent that says, oh, here's how the Saints like to use Alvin Kamara, here's how the Saints like to use Jamal Williams. It's kind of been game by game, which maybe that's the game plan, but if you're changing game by game, then it further establishes Alvin Kamara's point that there's not really an identity for this team. So with that being the case, I think that this is a game where you get to establish an identity for the last 6 weeks of the season. And I think you should establish the identity through the guy that challenged that there is no identity. That's the guy that you do that with, because he's the one that's willing to speak up. He's the one that's been willing to say, hey, I'm not happy with the way that this offense looks. Everybody else is passing blame, refusing to answer questions, whatever it is. We saw that with Derek Carr earlier this week, just like refusing to answer questions about how to get better. Alvin Kamara has been the one guy consistently all season outside of Cam Jordan that has gone up to the podiums or has gone up to, the pressers or whatever and said, I'm not happy with the way that this team looks, and it's disappointing. And I think Michael Thomas did that as well. The receivers have kind of chimed in on that. But man, I think that this is where you start to build things through Alvin Kamara. utilizing the option passes, especially right now. It's where you're looking at no Alex Anzalone. You got a rookie linebacker in Jack Campbell that's probably going to be the primary coverage guy for Alvin Kamara. Yeah, use the option routes, use the wheel routes, use the the different routes out of the backfield, out of the slot, out of the get Jack Campbell in coverage on Alvin Kamara out wide in a man situation. Like, these are things that we used to see the New Orleans Saints do all the time that we just don't see get mixed into this offense anymore. This is the week that these things should start to come back to this offense. And it's a shame that we're talking about it coming back, but hey, it's about what this version of the New Orleans Saints needs to do to win this version of this game. And that's just kind of where we are with this one. Similarly, against the Indianapolis Colts, against the Seattle Seahawks last year, earlier points this year, we also saw it work out. Taysom Hill works in this offense. Why do you keep going away from him? It's time to turn the red zone over to Taysom Hill. Derek Carr's red zone struggle is not getting any better. Not getting any better. And it's not about weapons. It's not just about the scheme. Some of it's about Derek Carr. A lot of it's about the scheme too. But what scheme works and what player tends to work in the red zone? Taysom Hill, right? That doesn't mean that you have to fully take Derek Carr out of the game plan when it comes to the red zone. In fact, that would be ineffective, right? So instead, you want to mix him in and you want to get Taysom Hill mixed in, but there's no reason to just ignore Taysom Hill. There's no reason to go into any red zone possession in this game and not have Taysom Hill, Alvin Kamara, Jamal Williams, and or Jimmy Graham on the field. And Jimmy Graham absolutely should be active for this game, especially with you being without Michael Thomas, especially, and especially with you being without Michael Thomas. Like, that's kind of the biggest thing, especially in the red zone. You want one of those jump ball guys. You got A.T. Perry. Now make sure you got Jimmy Graham out there as well. Jimmy Graham should have been active last week as well with Michael Thomas out. Like, that was shocking to me. So I think that you look at everything when it comes to this one in terms of what the New Orleans Saints have available to them on their roster, right? Considering health, injury, stuff like that, and how to best leverage that talent. And for me, the best talent that you have available to leverage are Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill. I'm excited to see what guys like A.T. Perry, Keith Kirkwood, and Lynn Bowden do. There's no knock on any of those guys. But I think that if you want to build your offensive game plan around a couple of cornerstones that have been consistent starters in your offense, then those are the guys to get that done with. We'll see what happens with Chris Olave. Maybe Chris Olave is active. Maybe he clears concussion protocol. The fact that he's been limited 2 days in a row is actually pretty good news. So we'll see what happens with him. But if he's able to go, I don't know if you're going to get 100% of him. That's kind of been the rhythm of guys that come off a concussion protocol each week. But if he's lighting it up, keep going to him. Keep going to him. And, hopefully he's able to stay healthy. Hopefully he's able to stay on the field. But if you've got Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara, Taysom Hill, Jimmy Graham, and Jamal Williams all available to you in those red zone situations, and you're taking the ball away over the defensive side, there's no excuse but to cash it in the red zone this game. No excuse but to cash it in the red zone this game. You have to get it done. Coming up next, let's wrap up with a look at what this game means to the New Orleans Saints. Win or lose, big win, tight loss, big loss. What do they all mean for the New Orleans Saints? We got that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at GameTime. The GameTime app is my absolute go-to when it comes to getting tickets for some of my favorite events, whether that's the Pelicans games, whether that's buying tickets for other folks for the Saints games, whether that's looking at things like different events that are going on, concerts, comedy. There's a ton of different stuff that you can find over at GameTime. And the thing that makes it great for me, two things in particular. There's a game time guarantee, which means that if I buy tickets and then if I go to another ticketing site and I find tickets same price in the same section and the same row as what I bought on Game Time, it will give me back 110% of the difference. So I could make a little bit of money by doing that. Also, on the other side of this, you get to see kind of a preview of what you're going to see from your seat. So you get an actual understanding of what your seats look like before you buy them. Those two for me, as well as the convenience of 2 taps and I'm done, makes Game Time far and away the best ticketing marketplace and then the only one that I use. So you can take all the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time today. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and use that promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Closing things out today with a look at what a win or a loss means for the New Orleans Saints. Big win, big loss, close win, close loss. We're going to take a look at all four and what I think that they could potentially mean for the New Orleans Saints, including whether or not you could see some big changes happening on Monday. We appreciate you, as always, all you everydayers out there making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, tomorrow is In Case You Missed It. So we're going to be going through our 5 biggest takes of the week, getting you everything you need to know in one episode so that you're caught up for Sunday's game against between the New Orleans Saints and the Detroit Lions. So let's take a look here at what a big win could mean for the New Orleans Saints. And this is kind of a surprising area to see the New Orleans Saints in, that if I talk about a big win, that it feels disingenuous, right? It feels like, oh, Ross, you're just being optimistic. You're kind of like, you're playing the positive side or whatever. But and I get that, but it's interesting to me that like that's the first thought sometimes when it comes to talking about this team winning. So what I think that a big win does for this team, with that in mind, is that it would establish an even higher expectation of this team. I don't think that a big win alleviates concerns about this team, right? Like, you have to accept the evidence of the first 11 games before you look at the 12th game and go, oh my goodness, it's all better now, right? Like, that doesn't feel logical. So what I would say is that a big win for this New Orleans Saints team doesn't really alleviate concern. It just generates a higher expectation for the following week. Because how New Orleans Saints-y of the Saints would it be to go into this game, get a big win, come out of this game after beating the Detroit Lions, come out of this game, and then lose the next week? Or lose the Thursday night game in a couple of weeks against the Los Angeles Rams, lose to the Giants, the Panthers. Like, that feels like that's the rhythm of what the New Orleans Saints seasons have been, 2022 and now 2023 as well. So I don't think that a big win necessarily alleviates concern for this team. It only generates an expectation of, when does it all fall out? When, or can you keep it going? Like, thank you for showing me that. Can you show me that again? Please, sir, may I have some more? Like, that's what I think you're going to get from a big win here. I think a big loss, a lot of folks would love for me to say, is going to lead to Dennis Allen being fired on Monday, or Pete Carmichael is going to be ousted on Monday or something like that, and a big loss. Let's say like a 41-17, 41-12. Let's say the Saints don't score touchdowns again and stuff like that. I don't think the Saints would go so far as to fire their head coach, but I think that a real conversation could happen, like a big loss like that. And if your offense is just inept, and let's say you give up another pick six and all this other stuff, I think the two biggest conversations that will happen over the course of the week between week 13 and week 14 will be, should the New Orleans Saints give over play calling duties to somebody else, Ronald Curry, for instance, and should the New Orleans Saints make a change at quarterback? I think those would be the two biggest conversations that would happen in that case. And I think the one that's more than likely to happen would be that the Saints would maybe make a change at play caller, maybe make a change at offensive coordinator. At this point, like, you kind of know, like, I feel like no matter what happens through the last 6 games of the year, that they're going to go a different direction at offensive coordinator. Frank Reich with the Carolina Panthers, everybody knew, okay, at the end of the season, they're going to go a different direction. And so eventually they just kind of said, why wait until the offseason? Let's just get out of the way now. Everything. And there could be a world in which, if the New Orleans Saints take a loss bad enough against the Detroit Lions here, that the Saints make that same decision when it comes to their OC. I don't think that they change over quarterback outside of an injury at all this season. I think the New Orleans Saints have kind of shown what they think about Jameis Winston. And I think that the New Orleans Saints have shown what they think about Derek Carr. They showed what they thought about Derek Carr when they signed him to his contract. I know a lot of people make a big deal out of $150 million. That's really not that big. That's like a middle of the road contract for a quarterback. It's not a big contract in today's NFL. And so, but I do think, despite that like, they did give him money and they did give him a contract that's going to keep him on the field. The New Orleans Saints at every juncture have tried to replace Jameis Winston. They went away from Jameis Winston and they tried to, go and get Deshaun Watson, who had 90-something, however, or 20-something, civil lawsuits open against him at the time. They went to Andy Dalton and didn't look back as quickly as they could last season. This offseason, they went and they got Derek Carr when Jameis Winston was, still an option for them at the time. And then, it wasn't made official that he was going to stick around until after they had signed Derek Carr. But we kind of know, right? Like there's no hiding here, right? There's no secrets. It's just, we know, And so I just don't see the New Orleans Saints doing that. I think, and we know that they won't turn to Taysom Hill at quarterback either, because Dennis Allen, one of the first things that he did when he showed up was poo-poo the Taysom Hill quarterback conversation, right? We don't see Taysom Hill as a part of the quarterback competition. Nothing's going to change about his role moving forward. And then they still use him as quarterback. And arguably, he's been the most successful quarterback under center in terms of points scored so far this season and everything. But I don't think that the Saints make a change there. I think that the Saints will stick to what it is that they built over the course of the offseason and working with the quarterback that they built that around. And like I mentioned, I don't think Derek Carr goes anywhere after the season unless there's a head coaching change. And even in that case, I don't know if he goes anywhere this season and that he would be back next season. And I think that's fine. I think if you get him in a new offensive system, you get an actual look at, is it Derek Carr or was it the system? Because I don't think that we can fully answer that question just yet. I think right now you see a lot of it's Derek Carr and it's the system, or it's the system and it's Derek Carr. But I don't think you see enough of one and one only. If it's a tight or like a close win, let's say the Saints eke this one out by 3 points, I think it's status quo. Everything just keeps moving as it has been. We'll continue to ask our questions about, what went right, what went wrong in a game like that. And then, get to a point to where you're just getting ready for the next game and you're going, okay, they won that one, but there's not much expectation for them to maintain proving anything to you. It's just, can you prove it again next week? And then if it's a close loss, I think that one depends upon what the color of the loss is, right? Like, is this a close loss because you had a 17-point lead and then you gave up 20 points in the second half, a la against the Green Bay Packers? Because then we're having a different conversation. But then in a different situation, if you're down 10 at halftime, hold the Detroit Lions scoreless in the second half, score a touchdown in the second half, and then you lose by 3 points that way, then we're talking about it at least a very different way, about a team that had some fight, a defense that showed up in the second quarter, all these other things. But I think that in any case, whether it's a close win or a close loss, things just kind of status quo move forward as they have been. And then the expectations just get adjusted about whether or not they're alive, right? 6-6 versus 5-7. Like, those are going to tell two very different stories, but how you got there will kind of become less important than the fact that you are at either of those spots, I think, is the way that will end up working out. But obviously the biggest impact comes from a big blowout loss. After that, maybe some different conversations are happening after if a big blowout win, and then kind of the close win, close loss kind of falls like no impact. Things just continue to move forward as I expect that they will here throughout the season. So that's it. That's a look at what a win and a loss might look like, and also what the New Orleans Saints need to do to win this game against the Detroit Lions. We'll see if they can pull it off. A lot of the country is going to be watching. This game is almost a national game, so there's going to be a lot of eyes on the New Orleans Saints, a lot of eyes on the Detroit Lions, and hopefully for you Saints fans, they can bring a win home or keep a win home in an unprecedented manner against these Detroit Lions. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Coming up tomorrow, in case you missed it, everything that you need to know, our 5 biggest takes from the week, getting you ready for Sunday's game. That'll be up Saturday afternoon. I appreciate you, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. And I thank you very, very much for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.